The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our sixth session on service-oriented IT. Today, we're going to talk about hardware, software, and contracts. We have a lot to get through in 30 minutes, so we're going to move quite quickly. Thank you. Okay, so the format, again, is a panelist discussion on our topic for today, and we're going to be going beyond lifecycle management of assets, and we consider assets to be hardware, software, and contracts within IT. I won't say too much more before we get into the actual content. Just an introduction to the panelists. Pierre, please.
Sure. My name is Pierre Paquette. I'm CTO here at Rapid Consulting. My background is in software development and consulting, deploying solutions, and yeah, that's where my passion is helping people get the most out of the technology they use and understanding what that technology can bring them, and know when to implement it. So, good.
Okay, my name is Susan Odell. I'm COO here at RAPA, and my focus and my passion is around business improvement and connecting business objectives to projects and to the operational activities that are taking place, and that's really my role. I've got a diverse background in terms of technology sets and very much about facilitating collaboration and getting people around the same table in terms of solving problems. Richard?
Yeah, my name is Richard Lavuk. I've been doing consulting work for the last 25 years. Last 15 or so related to IT service management and improving IT, the management of IT as a whole. Obviously, my focus is more from a process perspective. I try to understand how organizations work and how they deliver value, and then try to help in establishing the processes. So very much, we all three together kind of make up the three-legged stool that holds, all the IT knowledge, I think.
Great. Okay, so just a quick review and encourage you to visit rapaconsulting.com/resources/videos. We have recorded videos of our first 5 sessions where we covered the business value of service-oriented IT. We looked at the first 2 layers in the component hierarchy, and then we talked about organizational success factors. We then looked at systems and applications, and 2 weeks ago, financial management. So these topics are all connected, and we definitely encourage you to take a look. So again, today we're going to look beyond lifecycle management of hardware, software, and contracts. And again, when we talk about contracts, we're talking about any type of contract you're managing within IT. It could be a service contract. And we're really going to be looking at how your hardware, software, and contract assets underpin your services and the success of your services at the most granular level. So we want to take it that step further. So just to begin, Richard and Pierre, I think the discussion around this slide is the fact that, from a management point of view, we have leadership that wants to get to service-oriented IT, or ITaaS as it's otherwise known, and they really want to do things like be mature in service management, and they want to be transparent in their costs, but they have to connect those strategic goals with the foundation of asset management of contracts and hardware and software in order to be able to get there. So I just wanted to start talking about that, and maybe we could focus on some of the complexities as you move up that food chain.
Yeah, those underpinning components, those IT components, and knowing what you've got is crucial. We're, often CTOs, CIOs are looking at doing service-oriented IT and understanding the cost of the services they're providing, and in a lot of cases, managing the contracts, the software and hardware are things that are assumed, and they're assuming that the operational people are doing them. And I think often what happens is a disconnect between what the operational people are doing at that level and what the business people want to get out of those components. And operational is operational and business is in business, and it's that gap, and closing that gap is really important. And part of closing that gap, obviously, is to better know what you've got and how it ties into the services you're providing.
Yeah, I think the disconnect is really true. I mean, I think there is a lot of assumptions from one level with regards to the other about doing certain things. And one of the things I wanted to point out, I mean, although this is a layer diagram, I mean, we have to say, you know, on the side we're talking about complexity. We're not talking about time. So it doesn't mean that you have to do complete layer one before you can even start thinking of layer two. It all has to work together. So the IT service management area has to come into play to establish the right processes so that you can start doing the hardware, you know, and software asset management. So, you know, you have to do things in the many layers, but it's true that, you know, the higher you get in there, the more complex it gets, and that things like contract management and hardware and software asset management are the base on which you can build everything else. If you don't have that base, it's not a solid pyramid by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there. One is the maturity, and you're right. You don't have to be super high level of maturity in the lower levels of this diagram, and before you can actually start doing some of the stuff at the higher levels. But there's still a minimal amount that you do need, and it is you know, trying to tackle stuff as you're going. You know, too often we're trying to do cost optimization and optimizing spending and services without even knowing what you've got. So yeah, they all are interlinked, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this is a great image to have conversations with senior management and operations around the same table, because it really helps the organization understand the interdependencies and the connectedness between some of the more tactical stuff like the hardware and contract management, and how it's related. And I think if the organization can understand this collectively, then it's easier to start planning on how you move forward and how you improve. Okay. Okay, so to just kind of have a bit of a maturity refresher around IT asset management, what we have here, and this is available, we've got videos specifically on our website that go through our ITAM maturity model, so I encourage you to look at that as well. But you know, when you're trying to address the contract management and the hardware and software asset management, you know, in order to again mature, you need to get to a certain level of maturity in ITAM, and you know, when you're going to see benefits and significant benefits to the business of IT, you know, is really when you're starting to move from defined to proactive level of maturity. And this is just to point out that what we see and what is quite common, and what you probably have experienced in your organization, is that there's a purchase of COTS tools that happens, you know, as you are becoming aware that you need to have more control of your assets. You invest in technology to manage the information around those assets. But then, you know, if you're not maturing your processes, if you're not maturing other things organizationally, it's very difficult to make that next jump from defined to proactive, because a tool is not going to help you do that. So this was really just to talk about that.
Yeah, you mentioned that, you know, the COTS purchase happens between aware and defined, or somewhere around defined, and that's where it should happen.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll get the most value out of that COTS tool. What we've seen, however, is often organizations that are chaotic, thinking that if they purchase a COTS tool, that they'll be easier for them to go from chaotic to defined. And the reality is, you know, it's not the tool that's going to get you there. It is the change in mentality and the change in mindset, and putting in those just simple processes. You know, they don't have to be super complicated, but just enough to know that you're capturing things as early as possible, capturing information about the products and the tools that you're using to deliver the services as early as possible. Where you store them, what tool you use to keep track of them is really nor here nor there, really. I mean, we've seen organizations that can get to a defined state using Excel spreadsheets. Can they go beyond that? Probably not, because you're not getting the advanced functionality you are getting from COTS products. But the important thing there, and comes back to the importance of the processes, procedures around the life cycle of your contracts, of your hardware and of your software. And yeah, so there's lots to talk about in that area.
So Pierre, you stole my thunder. I was about to say that, you know, organizations see the COTS, the purchasing of software, wherever they do it in chaotic aware. as a silver bullet, and obviously we've seen so many organizations buy tools, try to implement them, and then ended up being shelfware because they don't have the, the process maturity nor the right people at the right places to actually use it properly. So a tool is, the quote is, a fool with a tool is still a fool. Well, I mean, that applies here too.
You know what? One thing you mentioned, Pierre, that I think is important. We see it. Well, not we see it. We've implemented it and recommended it multiple times. You could be proactive in hardware, for example, which is an easier task than being proactive in software. And so there are multiple tentacles of progression in maturity. It's not about I have to have all my assets and all my contracts and all my software completely in control in order to say I'm proactive. So you can break it down even within the asset categories and try to mature where maybe you have more resources to be effective.
Yeah, and coming back to that mindset, mindset of being operational and mindset of being tactical, strategic is different. If you're putting out fires on a day-to-day basis, or your operational people are doing what they do best, is dealing with operational issues, that doesn't replace, or that doesn't automatically give you that aware or defined state. Part of that has to be a mindset of knowing that you're managing stuff, you're managing components that you own, and you can't just expect operational tools to automatically give you the information you need. So, discovery tools are great to tell you, what software is being used and what hardware is being discovered. And it is a key part of managing the life cycle of an asset. But without those processes, how do you know what you have? If you're not discovering it, how do you know you have it? If you're discovering things that you don't know you have, how do you know if you're entitled to use it? So, it's that mindset change of management versus operational and discovery that too often organizations rely on their discovery tools to say, yeah, I'm managing my hardware and managing my software because I'm discovering it. Well, that's just a small part of it. So becoming aware and defined and eventually proactive, you need a good balance of both. To be proactive, obviously you need to be able to discover so you can validate what you own and how it's being used. So it's a really a progressive and a combination of information from different tools.
Okay, great discussion as always. So this is same pyramid, but from a different perspective, and again, continuing to connect an operational mindset to the strategic business mindset. So management is always putting a lot of pressure and has expectations around achieving longer term and shorter term goals. And we mentioned this again, that ultimate goal of service-oriented IT to be more competitive, to optimize what's being spent, to be compliant, to have control. And these are all reasonable expectations that management should have. The challenge is if you focus only on, for example, hardware and software in a siloed asset management context, you're going to end up with great control of those assets, but it's more effective to put each of these layers in context of everything else, a holistic view of how what one group is doing operationally interacts with other groups and the benefit overall. So if you approach these things holistically, then you have a positive impact on all of the other major service management activities that you're doing within IT.
Yeah, I think, and we mentioned it earlier. I mean, if you do it in a vacuum, it really, you could be really good at controlling, as you were saying, but controlling what and for what purpose? If you don't have the other things in mind, I control assets, but I don't understand the need. I don't understand, what it's used for in the end. I just control it. It still doesn't work. I mean, you could be, very mature at that level and still not fulfill the needs of a service-oriented IT. So I think, it has to be seen as holistically as possible.
Right.
Yeah, managing assets and hardware, software, and contracts for the sake of managing those contracts, if you don't know what services they're underpinning, then why are you managing them? So that would be the first challenge I would always bring bring forward is show me how that piece of hardware that you're managing so well, that has great control, what is it being used to deliver? And if it's not delivering anything, then you're spending some time doing, managing stuff for nothing.
Right. And if we take it from the other perspective of service design, clarity of understanding what's out there in the current environment is going to impact service design and what needs to be changed in order to meet a service objective, right? Or what's the relationship between my hardware assets and my software assets and this new service I'm hoping to roll out. Maybe maybe you don't know, but you need to know in order for that service to be effective. And it goes on and on. So there's a direct relationship between contracts, hardware, and software, and the ability to be performing well in terms of your services that you're delivering to clients. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say that I get that really ties back to the whole IT dilemma of IT being great at technology and their track record of business has not been great, and that's really been the push for IT as a service, is to start thinking of IT as a service, as a business, and that the technology is just the enabler, and not to get drawn back into that. But myself coming from technology, I love technology, and if I could play with technology every day, that would be great. But ultimately, it's just a tool, right? So it's pretty interesting stuff. But if it's not providing a business service or a business objective, then why do we have it?
Yeah. Okay, so Pierre, I'll let you lead this one.
Yeah, this one was more about talking about what kind of information, what attributes would be tied to hardware, software, and contracts. And hardware has always been the easy one, and Sue kind of mentioned it early on in in this conversation, that hardware getting to a defined, a proactive state is pretty easy compared to doing it for software and contracts. Your operational people are probably doing it today. They know what servers they have. They know what technology, physical technology they have, and they do keep track of these attributes. Serial numbers, makes, models. Where it becomes interesting, or where it becomes important in terms of lifecycle management, is to start keeping track of things that are tied to how the actual hardware is used. So who it's assigned to, what environment it's dropped into, what's its current lifecycle status, what's its end of life date, and then how it ties to the other components here. What software runs on it, what contracts are associated to it. Tied to that, and I've intentionally put it down here as the number 5, is monitoring information. The monitoring information is really being used to validate the information you have. So during the process lifecycle for hardware, receive, deploy, retire, and dispose, at receive you'd be capturing a lot of the information you've got, and then during the managed state, while it's being used, you can then do the validation through discovery. So these attributes for hardware are just a very high level in terms of what you want to keep track of. The point is, the attributes you use need to be tied back to something you want to do with that information. So everything that's here has a purpose. We want to know who it's assigned to, so we can keep track of who's using that piece of hardware. For software, it's very similar as well. Identification of the manufacturer, the title, the version. That's how we keep track of the software. Some license information. Software is very closely tied to a contract. So, and even we've had this discussion in terms of what is software. Well, software is just a right to use contract, and it's almost like a service contract for technology. Of course, you keep track of what the terms and conditions of that software, what the terms and conditions are, and it's tied to the version, the license type, the upgrade and downgrade rights, and so on. Software also gets assigned out to users and devices. That information there would help you keep track of compliance, again tying back to your rights to use and your terms and conditions. The financial information is as important here as it is on the hardware side, as well as on the contract side. Really is to that's your proof that you own it. And it goes back to compliance, it goes back to financial transparency, cost transparency, and understanding cost. From a contract point of view, attributes are very similar that you would be keeping track of. Vendor, a version of a contract, the terms and conditions. If it is a service-based contract, maybe some service levels, some effective dates, types of contracts, when it was last negotiated. So there's a slew of attributes that you would keep track of for all three components. The goal, though, is to keep track of attributes that would help you gain from the information once you're looking at your inventory as a whole so that you can make decisions. So to be proactive, you need to have things like end-of-life dates or effective dates to be proactive in terms of how the actual components are being used. You have to know who's using them in which environments, and so on.
So in the service lifecycle context, if I'm responsible for whether it's service design or service transition, if I'm releasing a particular service that has dependencies on particular hardware or software or a service contract that is in production, but I'm unaware of the end-of-life date for any of those things, that could have a pretty significant effect on my release cycle for whatever service I'm either deploying, it's brand new, or I'm updating or making changes to. So in an ITAM context of proactively managing this information so that it's available, that's critical because your other stakeholders, which may be people responsible for service definition, service design, whatever it may be, service operation, need that information to make decisions around the services that are being delivered to customers. So this is really critical stuff where, a thing like an end-of-life date for a piece of software seems like one bullet on this particular slide, which this slide, by the way, is extremely high level in terms of the attributes that you would be managing in these three areas. But that one bullet could significantly impact an entire service offering to a client in terms of availability. So this is really important stuff.
And just to stress a couple of points that you mentioned, I think, certainly, the information is important, but you need to recognize what is the important information, like they were stating, because, I mean, these tools and some discovery tools provide you with hundreds and hundreds of different fields, and, maybe they look nice to have, but do you really need them? Do you really need to, keep that information? Because although some of the information is discovered and can be automatically populated, a lot of the information should actually be managed through good process. The statuses, the life cycle changes, that is not something you discover. That is something that you manage through process. It's something that's being implemented, that's being taken out of production. So managing all of this data is actually adding work to people. So you have to make sure you manage the right data for your needs, but not just for the strict needs of asset management, but as Sue was mentioning, for the needs of all of IT. There is information that you manage as part of asset management that from an asset perspective may be of limited use, but may be of great use from someone planning releases or someone developing a new service. So, there's a lot of thought that needs to be given there. It's not just a question of this tool allows me to have 250 attributes, I'll track all 250 of them.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, and tying it back to the stakeholder who's getting the value out of that information. Of course, the operational people need the more granular information that a lot of the discovery tools provide, but somebody managing software needs a bit less, and somebody managing the business needs even less at that level. So yeah, it is important to see how the information kind of consolidates and floats up to the different levels of management.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes left. Pierre, can you take this one, please?
Just to quickly add, in the last series we talked about clients, we talked about services, we talked about applications and systems, and now we're talking about hardware, software, and contracts. And really it is about how all of these things are linked together. So when we talk about a CMDB, we're not only talking about attributes of the components that you're using to deliver services within IT, but we're also talking about the relationship between those. So our technical CMDB will be more interested in the things we're talking about today in terms of hardware, software, and the underpinning contracts or the supporting contracts. But just keep that in mind, that everything does roll up, or everything does relate back up to what you're trying to do, and that's deliver IT as a service. So, when we look at a piece of hardware or software, we should be able to go up that tree and see where the impacts would be if we were to remove that hardware, and the impacts all the way up to the service and ultimately the client as well. And the reverse is true, as Sue mentioned, that when we're looking at a service, we do want to know what the underpinning technology is, and that's again done through the relationship. So in the previous slide we talked about attributes. This one is more just to remind you that beyond the attributes there is the relationships, which is as important.
Yeah, and just to conclude, I think this is a big differentiator from what used to be the traditional view of ITAM, where I'm just managing these assets because they're there, to more of an integrated and even, as we were talking, proactive view of, I manage this asset because it's essential for this, ultimately this service, through this chain of relationships. And that changes the focus of how you do things. And what's important, I mean, from an IT asset perspective, it used to be, we focus on the most expensive stuff, but in the end it may not be the most expensive stuff that has the most importance for a specific service. So it's important to have these relationships to understand the context.
Okay, so takeaways. Hardware, software, and contract management, it's mandatory if you want to achieve service-oriented IT, and I think our discussions clearly articulated that. And then service asset and configuration management is key. So, the complexity as you get mature in software asset management and things like compliance and utilization, assignment, those types of things, and how they all come together, as Pierre was mentioning from a relationship point of view, will be key as well. And baby steps. So, as we said before, it's not about how do I get everything under control now. It's what do I know I will be effective putting controls in place, and how will I be able to sustain that so you don't lose ground. So as it says here, put your house in order and keep it that way, and take the baby steps in doing it.
Yeah, that's...
Go ahead.
That's a good summary.
Okay, excellent. So just before we close, June 9th, we'll be having a session on request management and its role in service-oriented IT. Info@rapaconsulting.com if you have any feedback or any other topics you'd like us to dive into. And then just a heads up, we have launched Rapa Insight, which is a managed IT analytics service. I won't say too much about it. There are a couple of videos on our website. But it's all about taking your raw data as it is, where it lives, and converting that into insights through our in-house proprietary technology, combined with the skills of people like Pierre, Richard, and myself from an analytics point of view, to help you collaborate across IT, control costs, mitigate risks, and help make your customers happier than they already are today. So I just wanted to encourage you to take a look at that. We'll see you on June 9th. Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Pierre.
Thank you.
That's all.
Bye-bye.